From years of working with writers in an editing capacity, in a coaching capacity, I will say that I strongly recommend new writers, or any writers really, not to edit as you go. Does the reader truly need to know this piece of information right here? Is it totally relevant to this scene and the reader's understanding of this world, magic system, whatever, or is this something that can wait? Identifying those 3 points can be helpful for writers, so you're not so overwhelmed with structure and I have to hit all of these beats, but really it's just...
Katie Wolf is a writer, editor, and coach who has helped many debut authors polish their writing and step closer towards their creative goals. In our conversation today, Katie highlights the different types of editors you're likely to encounter. She speaks about 3 things you should be mindful of when it comes to writing your first draft. And then she highlights a grammatical error that I didn't even know I was making. I'm so excited for you to meet Katie. Let me introduce you to her. Katie, could you walk us through the turning points that led you to the point of becoming an editor?
Yes. So first of all, I'm so happy to be chatting about this. I love talking about being a book editor and tips for writers and how I became a book editor. Really, for me, one of the first sort of seeds that got planted in my mind about maybe becoming a book editor was a degree in English Lit that I got in college. And I took an editing class, and that was where the idea was first kind of introduced to me. But I decided not to pursue it at that point because I felt like, I'm not sure. I don't know if I want to work in publishing. So I sort of put that to the side, ended up getting a master's degree and worked as a librarian for a little while. And then really the big turning point that actually led me to becoming a book editor is after I started writing, I was in a writer's group and I was doing a lot of beta reading for people. And I thought, I'm really good at this. Like, not to toot my own horn, but I mean, I'm a professional book editor. Like, I just had a sense that I was really good at articulating and breaking down how writers could improve their books. And I was gaining all this experience doing it unpaid. And I thought, like maybe I could transition to doing this in a paid capacity. So just that like curiosity about it was something that led me to start. Like I started on a freelancing platform called Fiverr and got some clients that way and built up my experience before I left that platform and went on my own. But yeah, it was just, so it was both things. It was that experience in college and then also that question of like, oh, I'm doing this for free. I wonder if I could get paid to do this and like really help people. So those were the 2 turning points.
Could you explain the different types of editors that debut authors are likely to encounter?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first is the developmental type of editor, and there are a few different names for it. Developmental editing, I call it a manuscript evaluation in my business, maybe manuscript assessment. This is where the editor is giving you feedback on plot, characters, pacing, world building, setting, conflict. So they're not actually going in to make any changes in the manuscript. They're just usually leaving comments. They're usually writing something called an editorial letter that just lays out all of their suggestions for improvement. Then there's copy editing that cleans up the grammar, punctuation, verb tense, subject-verb agreement, stuff like that. So they're just marking up the document and correcting all of those things, fixing typos, stuff like that. Then there's line editing. Line editing is really focused on helping you improve your prose and strengthening the actual sentences. So the line editor is looking for things like, hey, are you repeating words a lot? Is there a more succinct way to say this? Can you phrase this way? And then finally, there's proofreading, which is just the very final step of someone looking at the manuscript before it's published, usually. Querying authors this isn't needed for querying authors, but if you're an indie author, once the book is formatted, it's helpful to have someone proofread it just to make sure that there are no weird formatting issues or typos or anything else. So those are the different types of editing, and it's going to vary depending on your financial, what you can afford. It's going to vary depending on like what your path of publication is, if you're querying or you want to be an indie author, as to what service you need. But editors are always happy to help you decide that if you want to talk it out with someone about what you think will be most beneficial. But honestly, for most authors, not all, but for most authors, if you're going to do anything, I really recommend investing in the developmental type of edit, because I think that just helps you get the most out of it. Because you really want a solid book, no matter what you're doing with it next. Indie publishing, a small press, querying, you want to make sure that the book is solid. So if I had to pick one, I would probably say that's what I recommend.
Thank you for explaining that. That's very helpful. I think before we get to the phase of actually sharing our work with an editor, we need to get to the point of writing our book. So I think we're all familiar with the beginning, middle, and end, but we also don't really understand what that means a lot of the time. So would you be so kind to give us some story structure ideas or tips so that when it comes to editing a book, we're not going to have so many edits after our first draft?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to talk about this because I'm not a huge plotter myself. I don't believe that writers need to follow a very regimented plotting structure, but I can talk about three kind of highlights that I think are helpful for writers that are a bit more specific than just beginning, middle, and end. So, one of the things that I recommend writers start with is the catalyst or the inciting incident. And if you studied fiction, if you've read even, like chances are you'll just know what this is intuitively. But it's kind of like the thing that kicks off the book. It doesn't happen on page one necessarily. It's not like page one or two or three, but it's like the moment everything changes for the protagonist and it kind of like sets them on the journey that they're going to take in the book. Something happens to shake them up and set them on this journey. So that inciting incident happens like around the 10 to 20% mark of the book. That's point number one I think is helpful. Because every story really, you need to have something that propels the character forward and begins the story. And if you read a lot with this in mind, you'll start to notice how different authors do this, like different authors have this inciting incident. Next up is the midpoint, which is the middle. But really, in my experience as an editor, I've seen a lot of middles of novels that just sort of lag, where not much really happens. And so at around the 50% mark of the novel, you want to have things be flipped for the protagonist. You want to shake things up again. Maybe everything's been going really well, hunky dory, they're achieving the things they want to achieve, everything's great. And then they hit a big stumbling block in the midpoint and things start to go south. Or opposite, things have been terrible, horrible, everything's horrible, all's lost. And then all of a sudden at the midpoint, things start to look a little bit more rosy for them. But just something big happens. Like a lot of times I write thrillers, and a lot of times in thrillers or mystery, like a body will be found around the midpoint. So it's just something big to kind of shake things up. And of course, that's just an example in thrillers. But then the last thing that I think is helpful towards the end to identify is just the climax. So what is the high point? If you think about the progression of your stories going up, 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 things are getting, going down a little bit, going back up, going down up. What is the pivotal kind of moment where everything comes to a head in your novel? And that generally happens around the 80 to 90% mark of the book. So it's not the end. We need to see what happens after that little bit of a resolution. The resolution is what comes after the climax. But I think identifying those 3 points can be helpful for writers. So you're not so overwhelmed with structure and I have to hit all of these beats, but really it's just what's the inciting incident? What happens in the midpoint of the novel, and then what's the climax. And if you can identify those 3 things, I think it helps give that basic structure to a novel so you don't have to do as much revision in the editing process.
So what are your thoughts on authors who try to edit their book while writing their first draft?
I have a very strong opinion on this. But before I share it, let me just say that it's not wrong to edit as you go. It is fine. If you find something that works for you as a writer, that is completely okay. There is no one correct way to write a book. But I will say, from years of working with writers in an editing capacity, in a coaching capacity, I will say that I strongly recommend to new writers, or any writers really, not to edit as you go. I think it makes much more sense to just get the first draft out, let it be as messy as you need it to be. If no one's going to see it, you're not sending it to an editor or a beta reader or anyone. So let it be messy, because so much of the first draft is just you figuring out the story. And if you just if you constantly get in this editing spiral where you have to make everything perfect before you can move on, it's probably going to be hard to finish. So I say resist that urge. Try to just keep moving forward and get the rough draft out first.
That's so good because sitting down and facing the blank page is really, really difficult. And sometimes it feels like you're moving forward by moving backwards and checking everything you've done, but it can also feel quite paralyzing. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
Could you walk us through what you have come to see as some of the biggest mistakes most debut authors make in their first draft?
Yeah. So one of the big things I see, and this is feedback that I give to my editing clients a lot, is a main character who lacks a really strong personality, and I don't mean strong in like a physical sense, like they're mentally strong or they're physically strong or anything like that, but just that there's not much to really uh like if I were asked to describe the main character's personality, I would struggle with how to do that. They don't really seem to have a lot of weaknesses or any weaknesses at all. Often I read main characters that are just too perfect. They make all the right decisions, their relationships are amazing. Maybe their weakness is that like they're too self-sacrificing or something, but it's like they're just you need to read messy characters, you know? It's like people saying their character flaw is like I'm a perfectionist, which is like, well, yes,
Or I
that is a
work too hard.
yeah, exactly, exactly, yes. It's like, well, that is a weakness, yes, but also let's make it more interesting. Let's make it messy. Um, so yeah,
Okay.
characters that have no real weakness or personality. And then also characters that have no agency, meaning that they're not actively making decisions in the book that move the plot along. They're just sort of being swept along by the action and they're very passive, which isn't really interesting to read about either. We want characters who are making decisions and actively participating in the plot. So that's feedback that I give a lot for authors. And then the other most common, the other thing I'll mention is just world building. I work with a lot of fantasy authors who have a tendency to want to explain everything about the world up front to the reader because they've spent so much time creating the magic system and the setting, and they think it's so interesting. And it can be really interesting, but also dumping all of that on the reader, like in the opening pages, just isn't the best way to start the story because what connects us in fiction to a story is characters. So we have to have something to connect us to the protagonist before we get all of this backstory and history and geography lessons and everything else and telling us all about the magic system. So that's one thing one note I give to a lot of authors is just try to avoid that urge to dump all the information on the reader in the first chapter.
Interesting. Oh my gosh. Okay. I am going to ask you this question because I wrote a first draft of a book, and the feedback I got from my friend who's an amazing beta reader is that she didn't
Okay.
like my main character. And
Mm.
I was like, well, you don't have to like her. But she's like, no, but I want to like her. So then I went ahead and I wrote this prologue that gave backstory into why the character is the way that she is, which
Mm.
then you understand her and now you're writing with her. But then I finished the story and I had multiple beta readers and everyone was happy with it. But I started my querying process and I have had 4 rejections, and 3 of the rejections have told me to cut the prologue because they're like,
Mm.
this kind of it's let me think of what they've said. I've had it kind of spoon feeds the reader. Somebody else
Mm.
said it kind of reads like a gaming manual. um, and the other agent said something along the lines of expository.
Mm.
So I think that kind of ties into your world building point. So what advice do you have in terms of sprinkling the world building or the information about the character as opposed to just like making it too obvious?
Yes, that's definitely what I recommend doing. And really the way to introduce a world or have us understand a character is to see them in action. And action not meaning like fight scenes, but just like have them like the main character needs to make decisions, have conversations, actively participate in the plot, like move through the world of your story and think about when you're thinking about like okay what does the reader need to know. That's a really good question to ask yourself, like what does the reader truly need to know this piece of information right here? Is it totally relevant to this scene and the reader's understanding of this world, magic system, whatever, or is this something that can wait? Because the reader will come to know a character through their decisions and their relationships. It's kind of like showing, not telling. It's like a similar form of that, where instead of just telling
Mm-hmm.
the reader all about the character, let the reader see that in action. So instead of telling us that the main character is stubborn, show us that in her relationships, in the decisions that she's making where she's refusing to do something. So that's a much more effective way to do it. And I will say, just on the prologue note, that 90% of the time I tell clients to cut prologues because that's so much of what prologues are. And they can be very well
Yeah.
written. But the problem is just
Yes.
that the reader doesn't know the character yet. They haven't had a chance to see
Uh,
them or like really get to know the story. So to hit them with all of this in the prologue, just that's not where the story should start. 90% of the time.
oh my
Sometimes it works,
gosh.
but yeah.
Yes. Yeah, but it is like, I mean, after thinking about it, like sitting with the rejection really hurt and that sucked. But then I was like,
Yeah.
well, actually, my favorite books are when you like get to know the character along the journey. Like, I don't like
Right.
being spoon fed. It's like meeting somebody and they tell you their whole life story when you just like met them. You kind of
Yeah,
want to get to know them a little bit. And then
exactly.
over time, you're like, oh, is that why you act like this? Or is that why you
Yeah.
respond like this? So, great tips. Thank you.
Yes, yes. And
This is
that's
going to help me with
so many
mine.
writers so many writers have that kind of go through that. So you're not alone. And if you're listening to this and you've gotten that feedback, you're not alone.
So, could you give us maybe a developmental concept that you wish more people were aware of?
Yeah. So the type of editing, I have two types of editing that I do in my business. One is copy editing, which cleans up the grammar, punctuation, verb tense, stuff like that. And then the developmental type of editing for my business is called a manuscript evaluation. But this is where I'm really giving people feedback on plot, characters, pacing, world building, all of those like story elements. So really, honestly, I'll share two little tidbits that are like things I wish people knew. One is just the fact, like I mentioned before, there are a lot of different types of editing, but when it comes to the developmental type of editing, where I'm giving someone feedback on the story, I'll just say that kind of a more high level thing I wish people knew is that getting feedback on your story, whether it is an editor, beta reader, alpha reader, whoever it is, your mom, um, getting feedback is truly one of the best things you need, like you can learn how to do as a writer. It develops your resilience. It helps you improve your skill set. I always tell people who are querying to not query your novel unless you've had at least one other person read it. And I truly think it's just, it hurts and it's hard and I get it. I'm a writer myself. Like we've worked so hard on our projects and it can be hard to open ourselves up. But I truly think that's how you grow as a writer is getting that feedback on the plot, characters, pacing, conflict, world building, because we're so close to it that we can't look at our own work objectively. And that goes for a very new writer who is staring at page one of their manuscript to a New York Times, like best-selling, globally successful author. All of us, we all have that issue where we just can't see our work objectively. And so getting that outside perspective is so, so important.
Katie, would you be so kind as to give us a tip with regards to a grammatical rule that you often see people getting wrong when they're writing their manuscripts?
Yes. I could share something that I see a lot. This is a correction that I make a lot when I'm copy editing a manuscript. It's something called a comma splice, which is where you have two complete sentences with a subject, a verb, like they are full sentences. And instead of putting a period, the person puts a comma. So you have two complete sentences that are separated by a comma. And there are a couple different ways to fix this. So you could put a period in between the two complete sentences, like the cat meowed loudly, comma, it was so annoying. Those are two complete sentences, right? You don't want to have a comma there. So it'd be the cat meowed loudly, period. It was so annoying. Or you could also put a comma there and put and. So the cat meowed loudly, comma, and it was so annoying. So there's a couple different ways to fix it, but basically if you have full sentences, you don't want to put a comma there. But another thing I'll say really quickly is to this is something that I didn't know before I started copy editing, that there are different style guides that have essentially different rules for grammar, which makes it very interesting as a copy editor. Like I have a style guide that I follow that has all sorts of usage rules on when you should put commas, where you should put commas, colons, semicolons, em dashes, like everything is very specific and this is how you do it. But if you look at a different style guide, they might have slightly different rules. So this is where it gets tricky too with like American English versus British English versus Australian English. So there's all these different usage cases and it can get a little bit muddy. So that's something that I think is interesting for people to learn too, that sometimes we think we see a typo in a book, but it might actually not be a typo if they're following a different style guide. Not to
Mm.
make it like too confusing, but yeah, it is interesting.
No, that's It is very interesting because I actually hired a proofreader from Fiverr.
Mm.
And when I looked at my the Google Docs thing that she sent back, I was so confused because they were just like full stops, periods. But like I
Mm.
was like, what? And so I just deleted them all. Now I'm like, oh, hold on, maybe that's what it was.
It
It
might
was
have been,
supposed to
yeah.
be 2 cents. It just didn't make sense. I was like, would you just want to throw in a random period? Like, what? So thank you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Now I understand I make your biggest error.
it's
I
okay.
have learned so much. I hope everybody who's watching this is taking as much as I am from it. But yeah, I'd love to have you back at a later stage to maybe talk like genre specific editing and
Mhm.
tropes and stuff like that. But before I let you go today, would you be so kind as to share maybe the best piece of writing or creativity advice you've ever given or have heard
Yeah,
before?
absolutely. So the one that I've received myself is when I took my very first writing class years ago. The teacher gave me the advice of not to edit as you go, which I had never heard before. I was a brand new writer, and that was like eye opening for me because that's what I've been doing, and it was going so slowly. So that was number one. And then I think the one that I pass on often is like writing a book is so incredibly hard and like challenging, but it's one of the absolute best things you can do for yourself in terms of growth and mindset. Like you will grow so much as a person um, through the editing process, through the writing process. I know it's a bit more mindset focused, but it's just like you learn so much about yourself and about life going through this process. So um, yeah, if you have the urge to write a book, you really should go for it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. I'm really
Yeah,
grateful. And I will
yeah.
link to your channel in the description. And if anybody wants to work with you, I will link to your website as well. Thank you,
Okay.
Katie.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.